I'd ask the youth of today to read the minutes of last generation's meeting. What looks crazy as hell in 2021 wasn't so nuts in 1971 and was very, very wise in 1941. There was a reason why things came to be. There was a reason policies were put in place. The reasons may have changed. The circumstances for those policies may have changed, but be gentle with your judgments, because there'll come a time when another group is going to be judging you and what you did in 2021. And was that really the smartest thing to do?
Hello and welcome to The Real Story, conversations with chiropractic icons, legends, and future heroes.
Today we have the, I'll say, honor of being with somebody who fits, as far as I'm concerned, all of those categories, including future heroes. And I say that because when you hear our story today, I think you're going to agree he's one of the past, present, and future heroes. Of course, we're talking about none other than Dr. Gerry Clum. Dr. Clum, it's an honor to be with you, as I'm grateful to be able to call you both a friend and a mentor. And let's just sort of kick things off and get right into why we're doing this. And you and I had a conversation a couple days ago about a brand new book called Contain and Eliminate. And as we were talking about it, you know, for anybody who's been around the chiropractic profession for several decades, those words should ring something that maybe makes your hair stand up, let alone your blood pressure go a little bit higher. We talked about it and you said, well, that's actually the backdrop of my entire career. And so we're honored that you said, yes, you would let us help document the history of our profession and really be, I think appropriately so, the first person that we bring onto this program. So let me say first, thank you so much for being here. We're honored to have you. Let me invite everybody to join Dr. Gerry Clum.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I'm very excited about the serendipitous nature of our conversation, where we were just talking about, you know, affairs of the day, and the subject of the book Contain and Eliminate came up, and my enthusiasm for it. And as you said, and we commented, the timing of the book. I started Palmer in 1970, graduated in 1973, and the Wilkes suit was filed in 1976. And if you remember that went on for more than a decade, and went through, you know, all the way to the Supreme Court here in the United States, obviously. And it really is one of those things that, you know, when we think about the Vietnam War, you know, it took 20 years for the first movies and the first books and so on about the Vietnam War to come out. And it takes a great deal of time for stories to mature, for all the details to emerge, and for the connections that aren't there today, that when you look back 10 years, say, I'll be damned, look at how that fit with that, and how this fit with this, and so on. And that's what this book represents to me. And aside from being a great piece of documentation, it's not written by a chiropractor. It's written by a former American Medical News reporter.
Wow.
This is a guy that worked for the American Medical Association for a long time, then went on to report on the American Medical Association to the Chicago Sun-Times for decades. And you talk about somebody that knows their business. You know, he knows the AMA inside and out. He knows reporting inside and out. His name is Howard Walensky. And he's, to me, when you meet him, he's that Chicago, you know, you're looking for the stogie, you know, hanging out the corner of his mouth reporter. And he did a great job with the book. And having had the factual background of working with AMA News, knew all the leadership within the American Medical Association of the time, knew all of the reporters across the day when reporting and newspapers and magazines and publications like AMA News were how people got their news, obviously way pre-internet and pre our current moment and social media environment. So, we're talking about somebody that's steeped in the process, was a gritty researcher, and dug up a story that the truth of the matter is, if you and I sat down and had a couple bottles of wine and said, let's come up with the craziest idea we can come up with, and we'll figure out how this affected chiropractic and so on, you wouldn't come anywhere near this. So my excitement about this is that as I read the book and I went through it, it took me through all the phases of my career, from the time that I was a 12-year-old kid who had a great experience under chiropractic care. And I can remember explaining to my mom and my dad that I wanted to be a chiropractor at 12. And my dad had been under chiropractic care, and he had classic, low back guy, and had gotten relief under chiropractic care. And he had a very positive perspective on chiropractic. My mother didn't have any particular relationship or interface with chiropractic, and so she didn't know much. All she knew is that, life would be easier if her son was a medical doctor as opposed to a chiropractor. That, the order of the day would be different, and we're talking 1964 here. So it's a different time. And after that, expressing that to my parents, they weren't negative, but they wanted me to make an informed choice. And my mom gave me a book, and I apologize that I don't have a copy to show you of it. I have one here in my home someplace. And it was called The Case Against Chiropractic by Ralph Lee Smith. And it was a paperback, and she said, it's important that you read this. So I followed my mom's advice. I read it. And thankfully, I didn't follow any of the advice that was in the book, because it was a slam job on chiropractic, and it was awful. And it was all made up.
Wow.
But when I got into the consideration of contain and eliminate, as I'm reading through the book, here I'm reading about the contract between Ralph Lee Smith and the American Medical Association to write this hit job book that my mom gave me as a 12-year-old kid that could have determined the path of my life in a very different fashion. And I'm not slamming mom and not being critical in any way at all. But I'm just saying that had that information been absorbed into my mind and experience differently than it would have changed my life completely. And when I factor that into this history of the book, and that this was, and you sound crazy when you say this was a plot. This was a plot. There's no other longer, shorter word for it. This was a plot to contain and eliminate the discipline of chiropractic. And it continued for decades. And one of the passions that I have at this point, I'm 70 years old. The majority of my contribution is behind me relative to the profession, but helping people remember where we came from, how we got here, and the things that shaped us, I think is one of the things that only people with gray hair can provide. And that's what I'm hoping to do in this conversation and in this discussion. So maybe a very long-winded answer to a short question on your part, but that's what's gotten me into it and into this conversation in particular.
And we're so grateful that you have and that you're willing to, and obviously you see it that same way. And we're hoping perhaps this is a conversation that influences others positively the way that didn't negatively influence you at such an early age and so on. So yeah. Let's lay out the backdrop. So you decide to become a chiropractor. For those that don't know you, let's sort of bring them up to speed of your career. But I think we do really want to focus on, the specifics of, the involvement you actually did have. You didn't just watch this happen, you were intimately involved in the process. Maybe nobody more involved than the actual lawyers and, defendants or plaintiffs and so on. You were sort of like the fifth Beatle of the experience, the way I'm seeing it. Let's go back to explain, what do people need to know?
Yeah, well, that's way too generous in my direction. All right. I was an observer of this, and it was unfolding as my career was beginning to unfold, and I was nowhere near the leadership and of this process, but I was aware of it as it was unfolding, and as my involvement increased, my assuming the presidency of Life West brought me into a little bit more. Higher profile in 1981, and then carried on through those years. I became more and more involved and more aware of it, and had some influence around the edges. But I certainly don't want to impose myself as being a central player in this. I was an avid observer, and so on. But I was not, one of the decision makers or the policymakers in that, and I think in a sense that gives me a good perspective to look at this book and look back on it as well. I wasn't involved in those decisions. I didn't make the decision to employ this one or that one, or to go this route or that route and so on, and those were for far more senior people at that time than I was, and rightfully so. But when I look at those times and we think about how this emerged, when I was in school, there was a group out of Berkeley, of all places, that published a pamphlet, about a 32, maybe a 48-page pamphlet. It was entitled "Autopsy on the AMA." And it was a student-run, student information group at Berkeley. This is 1970, okay? So we're talking, this is the radical element of the day. And for those that weren't consumed with discussions about the war, this is one of the subjects that was on the table. And then out of 1970, that was the early 70s, 72, 73. And then from there, the first book to break onto the horizon was a book entitled "In the Public Interest," and it was an expose of internal documents of the AMA, and it was published, as fate would have it, by Jerry McAndrews, who was then the executive director of the ICA. He purchased the rights to the book and published the book, and it really started the process of information coming out about the behavior of the AMA. And up until this time, they had their halo on, and they had their white robes, and they were taking care of everybody, and they were people acting in with great nobility and on behalf of the public. And all of a sudden, some of their leadership winds up in jail, and arguments being put forward that the AMA was being administered from a jail cell through the executive director by the fellow that was the former president, was now in prison. So all this stuff started to emerge, and financial irregularities started to emerge, and the problems of representation. When I was a kid, the AMA was the landmark for membership, and now we know today it represents a fraction of the participating field in medicine and so on. And that deterioration was going on at that time. So they had this fight for their own survival, and we were a competitor in that environment. So all of those elements of competition, and frankly, the element of competition was critical to this because this was an antitrust action that ultimately prevailed in the direction of the chiropractor. And absent the economic element of that, there's no antitrust argument to be made. All of these things had to come into play. But when we think about and listen and see the players, you talked about the people that were the decision makers. The leadership of the ACA wanted no part of this. Their attorney, a fellow by the name of Harry Rosenfield, absolutely get away from it, stay away from it. We don't need the publicity. National College, which was in Chicago, still is in Chicago for that matter, wanted no part of it. Dr. Jancy was death on the idea that we just don't be sticking that bear, and don't be making trouble here where there isn't trouble kind of perspective. And it was the activity of individuals. Chester Wilk, in particular, a chiropractor in Chicago, became the lead point person on there. Very colorful guy, very some might say controversial guy in some of his views and so on, but he was a dog with a bone, and he had settled in his mind and his heart that we were the victims of a conspiracy, we were the victims of a plot, and that the end result of the entire process was contain and eliminate the profession, and the AMA was being used as its tool. The exciting thing about all of this was, as things unfolded and the documents came forward, is that the phrase "hoisted on your own petard" comes to mind because it was their own documents. We didn't have to make the case; they made the case. They laid it out, and they said their job was to contain and eliminate this discipline. So understanding all of that and then seeing how things began to play. I made reference earlier to the concept or the involvement of the Scientology community in all of this. L. Ron Hubbard had published his book Dianetics years prior to this, and he had expected that the psychiatry community would welcome his thoughts and ideas regarding mental health and begin the process of shifting how we dealt with mental health into the Dianetics model, and so on. Well, if you know his story, not only was he rejected, he was soundly rejected by medicine and became the pariah of medicine. And whatever you know about L. Ron Hubbard or what little I know of him, he had a long memory, and he didn't forget and he didn't forgive. Those elements, in terms of the attacks that they brought against him personally, is what caused he and his organization to infiltrate the staff of the American Medical Association.
Wow.
They took a long-term position to begin. Let's put secretaries, let's put clerks, let's put copy clerks in positions in there that when the lights go out at the end of the day, the copy machines keep rolling, and we've got copies of everything that happened that day at the AMA. Was the perspective, and in the long run, they didn't find the grand conspiracy against Dianetics and L. Ron Hubbard that they had hoped to, but they found a grand conspiracy against chiropractic.
Wow!
And in the spirit of my enemy's enemy is my friend, well, they didn't find anything that was useful to them. They found something that was useful to us, and they passed it along to us. And a central feature of the book and of the entire process is an individual that became known as Sore Throat. And Sore Throat was sending packets of documents to members of Congress, to government agencies, and eventually reached out to the chiropractic community and sent those packets of documents. And had it not been for a few key persons like Chester Wilk, who was an early player in this, like Lou Sportelli, who was at the time president of the Pennsylvania Chiropractic Association, and was involved with the ACA, and disagreed greatly with Harry Rosenfield in terms of whether ACA should be involved in this process or not. Had those people not stepped forward, along with others, Bill Holmberg from Palmer, in the formation of the National Chiropractic Committee to antitrust committee to pursue this and to try and get the engine going behind it, all of this would have fallen by the wayside, and we would have never known. And if we think about things today, you know, the very conversations that we're seeing on social media today, while they may not have any direct knowledge and connection to this conversation of contain and eliminate and the AMA Committee on Quackery, there is an unquestionable string of DNA that runs from those early days and those early perspectives to this very moment. And the more we understand it, the better we can appreciate it, the better we can get a handle on the idea that, no, that's just too crazy. That didn't happen. That did happen. That did happen. And the more we understand that, the more we appreciate that, we can really see the long-term toxic effect of all of this behavior on the part of persons in medicine. Clearly, the relationship between physicians and chiropractors in 2021 is different than it was in 1971. Okay, no question about that. In 1966, the AMA News published a policy that said that there can never be an ethical relationship between a medical doctor and a cultist who refuses to recognize scientific medicine. And you and I were the cultist. And that was the basis that every radiologist in the country was warned that if you read a film by the chiropractor and something happens to that patient under chiropractic care, you're liable too. All of that was promulgated during this time, and to appreciate this and to see how it unfolded and to see how the seemingly meaningless little tidbits here or there got put together to create the book, number one, and to line up to create the environment where this was a tolerated and encouraged behavior is a fascinating read. Fascinating read. So,
Gerry, there's a couple of things that you touch on that I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into. And culturally, when we think about the 60s and the 70s, what's your instinct on why they chose chiropractic? Obviously, there was acupuncturists at the time. There were naturopathic doctors. Was it that chiropractors were making money with that chiropractic utilization going up? What's your take on why did chiropractors get singled out, or did they? Am I missing part of the story?
No, you're absolutely correct on that. And we got singled out. It all started in Iowa. And it had to do with the concentration of chiropractors that were practicing in Iowa, and the confrontation between the Iowa Medical Society and the chiropractic community in Iowa. And the chiropractic community was going about its business, and the Iowa Medical Society didn't like its business, is what it amounted to. And it felt like it had to do something in the name of medicine to stop the growth of chiropractic at that time. And if you read the book, you can trace the origins of the people that went on to Chicago to become part of the AMA Committee on Quackery began as staffers in the Iowa Medical Society. And they simply moved. Iowa brought their concern to the nation through the AMA, and the AMA brought those staffers into its organization to put them to work to really take this on as a major thing. Now, keep in mind there were elements of this that they were playing to their own audience. You know, the medics wanted, we got to do something about these damn chiropractors. Okay. The individual medic wanted that. Medicare was just coming onto the horizon. Up until this point in the late 60s, early 70s, they had held off medicine. Medicine had held off Medicare. You know, they invented the term socialized medicine, and it was successful as a continuation of communist thought, you know, to keep people from moving in this direction and so on. So they had their challenges. And so this became a rallying cry internally. The profession was beginning to grow. We were beginning to see greater numbers of people. And this confluence of activities all came together in a very, very unusual and unpredictable fashion that resulted in this moment in time. So when we think about, and let's think about, you said before, Jeff, about culturally, you know, we're in the Vietnam War era right now. We're in a situation where the campus environment is changing in higher education dramatically, and we have all sorts of social change going on across the country and across the spectrum. And this was just one more level of social change. Now, it was way bigger for us because it was the heart of what we are and what we do. But in a societal context, it was just as tumultuous as the racial issues of the moment were, as the war issues of the moment were, and as the cultural change issues were at that time. So it was, I don't want to say it was predictable, but it was not inconsistent for sure.
And many of these themes still seem to exist today, which is just simply remarkable.
Oh, absolutely. Every one of them does.
It's remarkable. Gerry, there may be some who are watching who are younger who may not know exactly what happened. They've heard a few things here and there. So I guess let me ask you a few things and take it from there. One, if you'll explain what exactly happened, went to the Supreme Court, and I'm also curious for, as you started sort of with your journey, you were starting school, you became college president. I know you continued in leadership. Can you describe sort of your emotions during that timeline? I mean, were chiropractors proud of this? Were they embarrassed by it? Were they, I'm sure they weren't on their phones scrolling the day of, what the news was, but there had to be some emotion of, I'm glad we're chiropractors, we're gonna win, or, oh no, if we lose, maybe our careers are over. And those are all my questions. What was the sentiment from the chiropractic profession? Were they supportive? Were they hopeful? Were they scared?
Well, I think it's pretty much as it is today in that regard. There were a group of people that were just, this is our moment in time. We've got to seize this opportunity, and we've got to run with this. And there was another group that said, "You be careful what you ask for. If this thing goes the wrong way, and you go to court and they find in favor of the AMA, you could wind up losing all the marbles." So there was a very significant split in the profession in that regard. And there were some who were very timid about, moving forward. And there were others that were kind of reached a Popeye moment. And if it's all I can stands, I can't stands no more, kind of thing. And, that time frame, again, that window of 1970, 1975, 76, 77 through there, where all of this was really starting to ferment, that became very critical. And you had talked about the actual mechanics of the trial and so on. The chiropractors lost on the first round of the trial, and won on an appeal. Wow. And then ultimately, the matter was decided by a bench trial, where the judge, rather than going to a jury, the judge would make a determination, and Judge Getzendanner made that decision in 1987, and then the AMA ultimately attempted to appeal to the Supreme Court, and that was rejected, and the decision of Judge Getzendanner stands to this day because of that. So, this was not a smooth process, and the twists and the turns along the way. The original defense of the American Medical Association was that they had to act in the public interest because we were so dangerous and so evil. And that was the basis, more or less, that the court entertained the first. And then on appeal, it came back and said, well, that isn't the question. The question is this an antitrust activity? We're not talking about the scientific merit. We're not talking about the clinical efficacy. We're talking about an antitrust action. Was that present? And then when that was brought back into focus with a judge who understood what that meant, that's when clarity came to the process, and the decision ultimately came down in the direction that it did. You ask about where things were moving in the profession. I have to tell you that there were moments along the way where we as a discipline did not understand the dire economic straits that the American Medical Association was in. We thought they were, had more money than God. And the reality was they were teetering on bankruptcy. And so as this was moving forward, we were building in our minds campuses with grand buildings and research facilities and so on from all the money that, I don't know if you saw this morning's paper, but, the courts accepted the $10 billion settlement on Purdue Pharma for OxyContin. We were spending the money of the AMA that was going to come out of this, and ultimately very little money changed hands. And I don't know the fine points of what did, but there wasn't awards to the educational institutions. There wasn't awards to the state associations or whatever on the way. But so part of that whole process is that, we had delusions of grandeur in terms of what might be done with the proceeds of this that ultimately didn't realize. But what was realized was the court confirmed that an organized, well-articulated, well-researched, well-funded, and highly coordinated attempt to contain and eliminate the profession was conducted by the American Medical Association and its cohort organizations, and that they were guilty, period. And that was an incredibly liberating moment. I have to, I don't know what to compare it to in terms of other segments of society, but it was a finally just, we told you so, and it was a vindication of decades. And it was the crap that every chiropractor had to deal with. It was the bullshit that caused Jerry McAndrew and George McAndrew's dad to die young from depression because of the implications of all of this. It's the careers that didn't ever come to pass because of Ralph Lee Smith and the crap that was written. All of that really, for some of us that were right in the middle of that time frame, it was like, God damn it, we told you, and it was a vindicating moment.
Gerry, it sounds like the answer to the question I'm going to ask is going to be a resounding yes, based upon what you just described. But Did docs at that time feel, do you think the state of the profession was this might have been a little bit of a missed opportunity? For instance, you mentioned there weren't those big sums of money that came back. There wasn't necessarily broad-based insurance parity, and the medical doctors still were able to practice, right? Which was never an issue. But in many antitrust cases, as you mentioned, we see these huge sums of money transferring and really aggressive fines and levies, etc. And it doesn't seem that was the case here. Do you find that was? Do you think there's a little bit of potentially a missed opportunity on the top end of that looking back? Do you feel as though everything played out in the best manner possible? I know there's probably a lot of emotions and certainly a lot of history that go into that, and maybe some things none of us will ever know. But what are your thoughts on, was it a good deal? Did it work out ideally, sub-ideally, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think it worked out as good as it was going to work out. And I don't think that we missed, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We dreamt of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'm sure early on, money was raised from chiropractors to fund this because we were going to get back a return 100-fold, But the reality is, we've all heard about the making of sausage, and it's something you don't necessarily want to see, no matter how much you enjoy it. There was a lot of sausage making here, and I would not second guess anybody, all the way down the line at this point and say, you should have done this, you should have done that. I'm grateful for what they did do. I'm grateful for the countless hours of travel, of work, of contribution that chiropractors and probably a very select handful of chiropractors across the country made to cause this moment to come to pass. So no, I don't look at it, and say, oh, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or whatever, or we could have come out of it with this or that. We could have come out of it with our tail between our legs. We didn't. We did have a good return. I would say that the one thing that I think the average chiropractor was disappointed by in the process is that it's kind of like looking at the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, once it got signed, everything was going to be better. Well, the legislation got signed and everything didn't get better. And similarly for us, there was a sense that we can take a deep breath, we can relax a little bit. All of this hateful rhetoric is going to change, and people aren't going to be able to say the things they used to say, and they just cleaned them up and said them a little bit differently, and they said them a little bit more pointedly, and they said them a little bit more carefully. But racial bias didn't go away in 1964, and bias against chiropractors didn't go away in 1987 when this happened. And I, for one, thought there would be more direct and immediate impact that would show up in the life and times of the average chiropractor across the country that didn't. We had our moral victory, we had our vindication, but the idea of how did this translate into behaviors changing on the part of other parties, that's questionable. Is it easy for you to get an MRI ordered by somebody today? Yeah. That's changed. Those kinds of things have changed. So in relationship to that, no second guessing. No.
I know you recently read the book. I know, I assume it jogged many memories of, I remember when, and emotions for that matter. Are there any, 1, 2, or 3 specific stories or specific things that happened, either that were written in the book or that weren't written in the book that you experienced that you'd like to share with us?
Well, it's over the years, since all of this has come to pass, it's fascinating. In the early part of my career, if I had told you what I'm going to tell you here in the next few seconds, I would have thought you've lost your mind. But Lou Sportelli, as an example, was a player in the ACA, was a player in the Pennsylvania Association, and was as far to the other side of the spectrum as you could imagine in my mind as a young chiropractor. When I look at the role that he played as an individual, bringing people together, having the foresight to maintain files as he did. I'll never forget being at a meeting not too long ago where he pulled out the manila envelope that the sore throat documents came to his office, and he still had the envelope he had torn open, and that's the documents were in. Having that kind of foresight to not let that go in the garbage, and to know, to see the long-term meaning that would have, fascinating. And as I have come to appreciate, for he as an example, for the dedication to this story and telling this story across the country, across the decades, and across the profession, I'm very, very grateful for so many people in that regard. When you think about George McAndrews, George is an attorney. His whole family were chiropractors. His kids are chiropractors and so on. But he's a patent attorney, and for him to essentially give up his law firm as a patent attorney in Chicago because the firm didn't want any part of this chiropractic thing, and go out on his own on our behalf to honor Dad and his family. Whew, man, we need to know about it. We need to know about it in detail. George is still alive. All of these names that we've talked about, still alive. They need to be thanked. Read the book, understand it, and let people know. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so wild to think back, and I think of the young docs listening to this who, maybe fortunately, really haven't had to experience anything, and the telling of it so that those new docs can really understand the foundations by which chiropractic came to be is so critically important, and I appreciate your attention to detail. Remembering and being able to go through the names and the individuals is astonishing and a credit to your experience as well. If I peel back your personal experience a little bit more, I know we touched on it briefly, but you said when you were 12 years old, you decided you wanted to be a chiropractor. I'd love to hear a little bit more of what spurred your interest along the way. It's very clear from how you've described everything so far. I'd put anybody in their passion with chiropractic up against you because it's very clearly there. What were the seeds of that? How do you decide to become a chiropractor, and what got you interested?
I was 12 years old, and I had 3 fractures. And I had a boxer's fracture on the left, a boxer's fracture on the right, and a clavicular fracture. And we were at the orthopedist, and he was setting the left boxer's fracture. And to my dad, as a joke, said, "You need to get this kid's eyes checked." And this is I was a big kid. I was tall, I was heavy, and I was a klutz, and so on. So big joke, get the kid's eyes checked. Well, they did, and lo and behold, I had a very significant loss in my vision, and it was eventually, I was initially thought that I had multiple sclerosis. And that what I was dealing with was either a tumor at the optic chiasm or multiple sclerosis and the effects of it. This is pre-CT, pre-MRI, and the test of the day was a procedure called a pneumoencephalogram. And you imagine putting a person in a chair, putting their knees up under their chin, doing a lumbar puncture, anesthetizing them, doing a lumbar puncture, drain the cerebrospinal fluid, not tap, drain, replace the cerebrospinal fluid with air. So now there's a contrast between the water density and the air density of the ventricles, take some x-rays, draw the air out to the extent possible, reintroduce the fluid, and you wake up 2 days later convinced your brain is being sucked through the floor of the skull, because it kind of was. The pneumoencephalogram didn't confirm the multiple sclerosis, didn't confirm the optic chiasm tumor or anything of the nature. And the condition was diagnosed as being bilateral optic atrophy of idiopathic origin with a progressive nature and ultimate blindness. That's the diagnosis my parents got at the Cleveland Clinic on the weekend of the 4th of July in 1964. We went back to Buffalo, New York, where we lived, and my father had been seeing a chiropractor, as I said before, for some low back problems, and he had missed several appointments while they were in Cleveland with me. The chiropractor happened to mention, so where you been? And what happened? You missed a few appointments. And my dad explained what was going on, and we were the last patients of the day. And I remember this fella sat down with my dad and myself, and he took out a Gray's Anatomy, and he took out a Guidance, and he took out a Boyd's, and he explained to my dad, forgive me, he explained to my dad what bilateral optic atrophy meant, what idiopathic origin meant, what a progressive nature meant. My dad was a smart guy, but he had a 10th grade education, and he was terrified. And I remember sitting in that chair, just like I remember this moment right now. And I watched the pain, and I watched the suffering, I watched the agony drain out of my dad's face when he understood what the words meant. And at the end of that conversation, Dr. Kassan turned to my dad and he said, "Don, I don't know if I can help the boy. Guarantee I wouldn't hurt him, and I'd love the chance to try." And I got my first adjustment that night. And over the course of that summer, from early July to the Labor Day weekend of 1964, I got adjusted 3 times a week. And we went back to the ophthalmologist in the fall of 1964. And this is the honest to God's truth. Basement office, back when they had the glasses where they put the lenses in the glasses and so on, and weighed like 10 pounds on your face. Camel cigarette in one hand, ophthalmoscope in the other hand. Comes in, my father standing behind me, behind him, I should say, and I'm looking at my dad, and he's got the scope in my face. And he said, "This is a goddamn miracle. What'd you do to this boy?" And he said, "We took him to a chiropractor." He leaned in, didn't lose a puff. He said, "I wouldn't take my dog to a chiropractor." And at 12 years old, all I knew was what you and your pals did to me damn near killed me. What this chiropractor did to me, you just said it was a miracle, and it was a delightful experience to go through. And in the process, I met one of the nicest, kindest, gentlest people I've ever met in my life in that chiropractor. And at 12, sitting in that ophthalmology chair, it was done. It was done, period. That chiropractor, by the way, my son is named after. My grandson is named after. The impact, generations deep.
Clearly, you never know how far-reaching. Gerry, what you've obviously dedicated your life and your career, your family's life, your family's careers are all involved in chiropractic. You were the president of a chiropractic college. You've been the president of, I believe, the ACC and many others. What do you hope for the profession? I mean, you've led this profession over decades. I remember reading the story when you were asked, don't you miss being in practice and having your hands on people and making an impact in people's lives? And your response was some version of, what are you talking about? I'm graduating hundreds of these people to go out into the world and do this, which is far more than I can do on my own, which was remarkably inspirational. What do you wish for the profession? If you had the sort of magic wand to inspire people to actually follow suit and listen to leadership and experience and wisdom, few have the behind-the-scenes exposure, let alone years and decades of experience that you do. What should we know? What should we learn? Where would you hope the profession goes in the future, after we've been through all of this?
Yeah. The first and foremost thing is that we never, ever lose an appreciation for and an awareness of the power of the adjustment. That's at the core of what we do. And it's what makes us unique. It's the skill that we bring to the table. And it's the contribution that we make to humankind. Our ability to perfect that, our ability to refine that, is something we should all be pursuing, constantly throughout our careers. But I think at this point, what I really would hope for is that I don't think we have come to appreciate, I use the social media moment. I don't think we've come to appreciate the power of what it is we have and how to use it. And because we can do things, should we do things? Because we can say things, should we say things? Or should we look at this in with the long lens and talk about, the potential for the greater good over time? Is this going to be good for my office and my practice in my town tomorrow? Maybe. Is it going to be harmful to the profession in the broader context? Maybe. Well, let's think about the greater good. Let's think about the long haul in this thing. Let's think about the service that we bring and what we put at risk with foolish behavior. And ill-tempered behavior. This whole idea is, well, I've got a right to. Well, yeah, I got a right to do a lot of things. There's a lot of things I've got a right to do that I could ultimately wind up in jail for. So because I've got a right to do it isn't necessarily a smart reason to do it. And so I'd ask us to take a step back and say, who are we in this for? If we're in this to serve the people and their health and their well-being and their needs, then let's serve their health and their well-being and their needs first. And let's put ours farther back down the road. I think we've gotten to a point where because we have had to be such rugged individualists to be able to get by and to make our mark in this process, we've come to the point where we think that's the only way to behave. We've taken that message that I said earlier before, my enemy's enemy is my friend. That's a very tough way to live. But that's the way we've kind of chosen to live. So I'd ask us to refocus on who we're in this thing for, what we're in this thing for. And if we're in it to serve people's health needs, let's find the best way to serve those. And then our needs will be served along the way without doubt, without question. We'll be taken care of. If we insist upon our needs being taken care of first, we're screwed. We're screwed. So I would say that as a discipline, we need to double check ourselves, and not technical matters, not that they're not important, but genuine motivational matters about what it is we want to do, what do we want to accomplish, and how's the best way to get there. And it is a decision not to go for the throat today, a decision to cave, or is it a decision to wait for the better time, the better moment to accomplish the goal and the need that we want to have along the way? So I don't know if that's anywhere near what you had in mind, but at this point in my life and time, I'd really ask everybody to think, I know you can, I know you've got a right to. Should you? Is it the wisest? Is it the smartest? And is there a better way to do it?
That's very, very well said, and I definitely appreciate that, especially for the docs out there, that are in active practice. They're getting their messaging out there. Thinking about it through that lens, I think, is incredibly impactful and important. One question I want to ask you, specifically relative to the leadership of a school. I think about that in terms of operations and dollars and cents and budgets. But one thing that struck me from the first time that I met you was your attention to detail with anatomy and physiology, and even as you've described sort of what you went through personally, remembering the test and really being so tuned in to the scientific aspects. What stimulated that with you to begin with? How'd you get interested? And what are maybe some of the resources that you use today? I know just a couple months ago, we were fortunate that you took some time to teach for us, and you're still teaching, learning, discovering. I love it. What started that path for you? It doesn't seem natural or normal for the leader of an institution. And what gets you and keeps you inspired today? And maybe what are those resources you love checking out?
Yeah. Well, thank you. There was a time when I believed with every bit of my being that all I needed to do was to deliver an adjustment, and that research wasn't necessary, that the result of the care was the research that was needed, and it spoke for itself. And I came to learn, perhaps too late, but I came to learn that is a very naive, very immature, very selfish perspective. And that because I have an understanding, because of an experience I've had, doesn't mean anybody else does. And I've got to give them what their world calls for in order for them to believe in what I'm talking about. And research is the coin of the realm, no question about it. I am not a researcher. I'd like to think I'm a reasonably good teacher. And I have looked for a couple areas that I could begin to get a little bit of a grasp on and be able to contribute to the understanding that the individual chiropractor will have to make our care safer, to make it more effective, and to make it be of greater value in the long run. One of the things I've always been puzzled by is that, if you would ask an ophthalmologist about a mole on your hand, you're not going to get much of an answer. If you ask a chiropractor, you're going to get an answer till the cows come home. Everybody's got an answer for everything, and so we need to grow up, and we need to understand what we don't understand, and we need to start to backfill those areas as much as possible, and that's really what I have decided to spend some time on in these last 20 years or so, One of the areas that I've been involved in is getting a better understanding of cervical spine adjusting and the stroke issue. And is there a relationship? What is the relationship? And understanding what that is, and so that our care becomes safer. None of us got involved in this to hurt anybody, and so anything I can do to help us be safer, us understand the level of safety that we do have, and really value that and put that to work whenever possible. That's something I'd be honored to have contributed to.
Gerry, is there anything you would be appropriate to sort of help? We're in such controversial, crazy, hypersensitive times. I find myself often censoring myself. Are there any parallels you can share, want to share about, what did happen decades ago, what's going on now, and sort of lessons that, I pray this isn't going to continue to go on forever, that we'll get through some sort of cycle and, get out to the other side, hopefully better. Are there any parallels that you wish to share or hope for, or that we can learn from the past?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think, when I started chiropractic school, there were 12,000 chiropractors in the United States. There's 100,000 now. That's not a long period of time to have a remarkable level of growth. In 1970, we were just starting to show up on the horizon. We weren't a pimple on the behind of healthcare prior to that time. And what we said, what we did was inconsequential, it was meaningless, and so on. That's no longer the case. Now, it may not be that the specific procedures that we advocate are at the forefront of healthcare, but the thinking behind them is moving to the forefront of healthcare every single day. And the reality is, as our thoughts move forward, the impact, the concern about our thoughts, and the significance of them moves forward. And the reason that things have changed and the scrutiny has gone up over the years is not because of danger or risk or anything of the nature. It has to do with the fact that there's more meaning to what it is that we're talking about. And there's more fellow travelers along the way. I think our answer in looking down the road is looking to other persons, other disciplines who share common thought and common understanding, may differ in procedure, may differ in technique, and may differ in care approaches, but have at their core a similar understanding and appreciation of life and health and well-being, so on. If we can rally with those people, the tide lifts all boats, and it's going to lift our boat and their boat as well in this moment. So I'm hoping that as we go through this process of trying to learn how to use the technology of the day, I liken it to, can you imagine what driving on the highways, 5 years after, Henry Ford invented the Model T was like? It was chaotic. Well, I think social media in the same way. Is there good that's come out of it? Sure. Are there positives come out of it? Sure. Are there broken bones and dead bodies along the way? Absolutely. And we just don't know how to use things right now. Let's learn how to use the tools that we have available to us. Let's be more thoughtful in terms of how we use them. And then let's double check why we're doing them. And I think if we'll do those three things, we can emerge from this process a little bit wiser, a hell of a lot more effective, and with greater appreciation across the society.
Wise words. I'm going to bring us back a little bit to switch gears and go back to academia a little bit. When you think of the years that you spent really, leading the institutions, leading the college, What were maybe one or two items where you feel really good looking back and saying, these were a couple really big wins we had for chiropractic education? And I'm gonna ask you on the flip side, what's maybe one or two initiatives that you think would be wise to maybe even revisit today that have never got off the ground? Because your experience there is probably unrivaled and unmatched. And I'm just curious, as you saw that evolve and continue to see it, what have you loved and what do you think might have been a missed opportunity?
Thank you for the question, number one. I'll be very happy if I can come up with a good answer for you. One of the things that I am proudest of in my career, and I don't know if that's exactly the question you asked, but I'll offer that as an answer. About 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, the majority of chiropractic education was funded on a federal loan known as the Health Education Assistance Loan, the HEAL loans. And if you can imagine it, it was like putting your chiropractic education on your MasterCard. And at certain times during that period of time, the interest rates were over 20% per year on those notes that people were using to fund their education. Through the Association of Chiropractic Colleges, as president of the ACC, I was able to work with other groups and bring forward a loan program, the Chiro Loan Program, that allowed students to borrow money for their education at the same rates as people going to Harvard or people going to Emory or people going to any other institution. We were able to get out of that burden of that HEAL debt and transition into students still would have educational debt, and it's significant. I don't mean to minimize that, but if you've got to pay 21 or 22% on long-term debt versus 3, 4, or 5%, that's a hell of a victory. And so bringing the HEAL loan program, phasing out of that. Because the program was phasing out of necessity. It was a terrible program. And then rolling into another program to replace it. That was a tremendous accomplishment that I personally was centrally involved in and did a great deal to engineer that coming about. So that was a victory for sure. And in order for that to come about, what had to happen was the very Association of Chiropractic Colleges itself had to be formed. And I was one of the officers. In fact, I wrote the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws for the ACC and drove up to Sacramento, California and filed them with the Secretary of State and accomplished that on behalf of the profession, the educational community, that gave us a framework to begin to do some of these other cooperative activities that had great benefit for our students, had great benefits for the institutions, put tremendous amounts of money into research and programs for both. So that was really a great opportunity for me personally and professionally. And I'm very grateful for the timing of it all. It was no great moment of insight or genius. It was survival. It just happened to work out well. So that's one that did work out. One of the things that I would say didn't work out is that when we came to 1995 and the centennial anniversary of the profession, we hit a high moment of cooperation in the educational community, in the political community, and we were very proud of our centennial, and we were very proud of having made it that 100 years and what it represented. And truth be told, we squandered the good out of that moment, and we didn't contain or didn't sustain that bond, that enthusiasm, and we let the old tried and true divisions reassert themselves and took steps back instead of steps forward from that centennial moment. I think of those centennial events. They were not huge, but there was a camaraderie there. The ACC, the Association of Chiropractic Colleges, signed its paradigm statements, and it was the only document, to my recollection, that had Sid Williams, Tom Gilardi, Jim Winterstein, and let's say Reed Phillips, all signing that we're in agreement on something. Across the spectrum of chiropractic education, never before, never since. And it's a shame that we weren't able to sustain that and weren't able to grow that cooperation and that dedication to that moment.
Gerry, knowing what you know and knowing who you knew, I know, between Dr. Sid Williams and, others, BJ Palmer and so on, where you are today with all of your experience, what would be there, or what is what's the new collective dream for the future for our profession? There was a time where we'd say, we want a subluxation-free world where everybody has access to getting adjusted and people are inspired to become chiropractors. And what do you think, BJ, Dr. Sid, yourself, those who paved the path, literally dedicated your and their lives for all of us, to what end? What should we be thinking in the future, knowing what you all know in the past, about possibilities, about impact, about change in a world that's, I don't know how else to say it, insane right now? What role should we have in helping shape where we're going? Is this, let's just let the dust settle? Is this, we should be preparing for something at the end or at the next phase as the pendulum swings? What's the new chiropractic dream from your perspective?
Well, I think at the moment, it's to be able to live a healthy lifestyle and make choices for ourselves and our families as we see fit. It's a very, very dangerous moment for lots of reasons. And there's the realities that we're in right now, is that I have always been a student of the law of unintended consequences. And there's a potential for a lot of unintended consequences on the horizon at the moment. We're making a lot of quick decisions without a lot of data. And I don't want to imply that we're not making those decisions sincerely, or some people aren't making those decisions sincerely. I believe they are very sincere. But sincerity doesn't change reality. And I think that we're at a moment where we need to just take a step back. We need to quit being a little as reactionary as we have been. We need to go back to the elements that brought us into being, sustained us for 120 plus years, and realize the value that they have. And then do whatever we can to bring those ideas forward in as logical, as reasonable, and as rational a fashion as possible. Understanding that there are moments that are served by extremism, but in the majority of our time in our life and circumstances, we are not. And I think we need to just take a breather, take a breath, take a step back, and just be a little bit more thoughtful about what we're doing in the long run, and think about what do our actions look like, and sound like to a world that doesn't understand us. And then let's modify the actions and the procedures and the approach to their world. Not capitulate, not roll over, but just say it in a fashion that it can be understood. Say it in a fashion that it can be absorbed. Say it in a fashion that it can be appreciated, and then go about our business as effectively as we can.
Yeah, there's no question that the benefit of chiropractic is with our diversity, as Jason and I have been talking about the last few days, and what you're touching on there makes me think of it. And it makes me think of when you were discussing the formation of the ACC. And I'm curious, as you said, 1995 was the one time we were able to get everybody to agree. When the ACC was coming together, let me peel that back. What was that like? Was that like herding cats? Was there a rallying cry? What really got everybody to be able to come together in that form? Because to me, that's a pretty pivotal moment in terms of, for the first time ever, the colleges, which all have different theories, different heads of state, different personalities, finally get in a room and decide to, in some way, begin to work together. What was that like? What was going on behind the scenes? And was there a unified rallying cry that brought everybody together, or was it just grit and determination?
Well, grit and determination were part of it. The goodwill of that 100-year moment was a significant part of it. Let me give you an example. This is a true story. We were in a work session to try and refine the paradigm statements from the ACC. And there was a facilitator from Canada, a woman by the name of Mary Rowe, who was very good, very good. And she was a tough cookie. And she could handle us as a group. And an opinion was put forward, and Sid said, I find it interesting that in this circle, it doesn't matter what the idea is, it's who puts it forward. And Jim Winterstein reacted immediately about how insulted he was with that perspective. And Gene Moss, president of CMCC, whom I certainly didn't expect to say this, turned to Winterstein and said, Dr. Williams is correct. And it was a few of those conversations just like that, where people crossed those lines that you wouldn't expect them to politically and ideologically and so on, that changed the mood and the moment. And I don't bring this up as an example to be critical of Jim or to be laudatory of Sid or anybody else, or Gene for that matter. But I'm just saying it was, to me, is such a clear memory of that moment where it went back and forth. It was like a tennis ball, just so fast. And it was like, Gene came back with just the ball hit the line at 90 miles an hour, and, it was inside the line. And, I think about that moment, Jim Winterstein didn't turn around and say, well, yeah, Gene's right, Sid's right, I'm sorry. That didn't happen, okay? But it allowed us to move forward. And, it was a very important moment. Yeah.
Gerry, what haven't we talked about? What, much of our agenda is to, acknowledge you and the other heroes and legends in our practice, but it's also to document our history and to, share with newer generations what they may not have yet read about or heard about. We live in scrolling phones, not, green books and other books any longer. What other stories or what other lessons or experiences would be important for perhaps younger generations to learn and older generations to remember?
Well, I don't think this generation is any different than any generation before it in that regard. History begins when you and I were born, and that's kind of how we see things. We need to overcome that proclivity and appreciate the fact that there is a sameness throughout time, that if we can learn from the sameness, we can avoid a lot of problems. I'd ask, the youth of today to read the minutes of last generation's meeting, and to understand that what looks crazy as hell in 2021 wasn't so nuts in 1971, and was very, very wise in 1941, and that as we go through time, be gentle with your judgments of the past. There was a reason why things came to be. There was a reason policies were put in place. The reasons may have changed. The circumstances for those policies may have changed. But be gentle with your judgments, because there'll come a time when another group is going to be judging you and what you did in 2021. And was that really the smartest thing to do? So I guess I told you before, I'm a student of the law of unintended consequences and a student of history, and fascinated by the twists and turns of life, and how amazingly they play out over time, and never give up the opportunity or the potential that they will play out for the greater good, and continue to work in that direction.
I love it. When we look at what goes on today, one of the things that's gotten me excited the last 5 to 10 years within chiropractic is really around what I'm going to say, the bolstering of sports chiropractic, because a lot of it ties to performance. And we see now chiropractors on the sideline, quote unquote, or team of every major professional sport. I think that's been an interesting evolution over the last decade or so, even though we have pictures of Babe Ruth from way back in the day, utilizing chiropractic. From your perspective, over the last 5 to 10 years, what's some of maybe the new avenues, or maybe avenues that were not so new but have been solidified, that have gotten you excited and you've said, man, this is a great avenue for chiropractors and chiropractic?
Yeah. Well, I think the advances in neurophysiology have just been so breathtaking. And, I see very little on the horizon that contradicts what we said 120 years ago. It says it a hell of a lot better. It makes a lot more sense of it, but I don't find it to be in contradiction to it at all. That's not to say that everything that was, put forward in 1895 is correct today, and I ascribe to it. I'm not saying that in the least. But what I am saying is that taken as a whole, there was more right in those early thoughts than there was wrong. And there's more evidence today that the implications of what it is we do is so far beyond the biomechanics, and not to minimize the biomechanics, but it's the starting point rather than the ending point, and the neurophysiological implications, just as you said, of performance, and of the constant unfolding and refinement of the individual apart from their symptoms and circumstances, is the promise that I see for the adjustment and for the scope of the profession over time.
You have any predictions of how that might unfold, or any interesting specifics? If you had the puppet strings, so to speak, would this be a chain of practices? Do you like the idea of individual practices? Do you see an evolution in how we deliver what we do Do you see us being, building, chiropractic centers similar to hospitals, but for performance, or being integrated into, structures now that we may not, or in the future that we may not currently be a part of? How do we manifest what you're seeing as this sort of new possibility and wave?
Yeah. Yeah. I think relative to those kinds of questions, I think about the restaurant industry. There's a place for Michelin 5 stars, and there's a place for McDonald's, and there's a place for everything in between, and there's a place for a pop-up stand on the street sidewalk. I'm not suggesting chiropractic be practiced that way, but all I'm saying is that spectrum of involvement and engagement, there's something and some reason for every level of that, whether it be cost, whether it be efficiency, whether it be competency, whatever it might be, whether it be ego, who knows? So, I see the same thing happening over time. We have been very slow to verticalize. The chiropractor doesn't see healthcare as a 100-story building. We see it as a 1-story building that's 100 acres across. And medicine sees it as a 100-story building. To have a 100-story building, you got to have a 50-acre base. So that change in that process, we're seeing that evolve over time. And just the things that you talked about, the sports influence, the neurology influence, the pediatric influence, all of those refinements, they're continuing to be implemented. We'll go through fits and starts of how to do it. And we'll go through the value of it and so on. But who hasn't done all of those things? In any discipline, in any endeavor, we do it the same way. And hopefully we do it as efficiently as possible, but that same pathway is there. So let's not be distraught over the fact that it is a pathway and that we have to go through it. It's the way it is. Let's just be smart about it.
Gerry, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to really share the history of chiropractic through your lens. It has been a treat and a pleasure, and every time I get to learn more, I'm continually impressed. And I want to bring it back to something you said before we got started. And for the docs out there listening, I know you're passionate about the Wilkes case, about the book, and really you extended an offer to those docs. I'll let you kind of pick it up from there on how docs can continue to learn more.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a vehicle as we're talking about this at this point, but I would love to have a conversation, whether it be one-on-one, whether it be in a group format or whatever. I don't believe I'm alone as a chiropractor whose life was impacted by the Wilkes trial and by that entire process. And I'd love to know more about how it affected other colleagues of mine. And I'd like to know from the guy or gal in practice that, good for you, Clum. I'm glad it had all that impact. Didn't do a damn thing for me. Okay, great. I'm happy for you, whatever. Or if it was the other way around, it's like, man, I felt the same way for 50 years and nobody said a word. Let's open that discussion. So, I don't know if you gentlemen can facilitate something, if somebody else can facilitate something, but if there's people that want to chat about this, great. If people just want to bitch about it, okay, I don't want to do that. But if I can learn from somebody, if I can gain insight into how you were impacted and how it changed your life, for the better or worse, then I can avoid a problem potentially in my life down the road, and I'd like to do that. So I'd love to engage a conversation. I'd like to engage if people wanted to go through a month by month or a week by week, chapter by chapter analysis of the book to talk about it and what were you fascinated by, and what were you could this guy really have worked for the DEA? Could we really have worked, for the Scientology? Is this plausible? What's the evidence? It appears to be there. So I just love to be a better student of it.
I should ask the obvious, where is the best place to get a book? And if you've got it near you, if you want to show the cover for people, I think I speak for Jeff and myself when I say we would love to host something like that, whether it's month-to-month book club or chapter-to-chapter, chapter of the month book club or some version of that. We would invite anybody watching this, whenever you're watching it, either to reach out directly to Dr. Clum, or to make comments wherever you're watching this video and say, I'm in or I'm interested. I'd be curious, and if there's a consensus, we would love to support and bring something like that to the profession. I think it'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, well, thank you. And relative to where you can get the book, it's an interesting story. I made reference to Dr. Sportelli before. He sent out a letter a couple years back to 150 friends and said, I need $1,000. And we need to produce this book. And that's how the book came to be. Lou Sportelli owns the copyright to the book and has committed all proceeds of the book to the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. The book is available through Dynamic Chiropractic. And I think, it was $29, $39, something like that. And you can order it online through Dynamic Chiropractic. And if you just put in Contain and Eliminate, I'm sure you'll find it quickly. Pick up a copy and take some time to learn some fascinating stuff about our profession that could very well go through the cracks if we're not careful, and some great flavor and great meat be lost off the bone.
Well, I'm going to simply just take the moment and opportunity to thank you deeply, both for being our first guest on The Real Story, but also very importantly, just for the impact you've had on my personal life, both as a friend and a mentor. But also, when you talk about proud moments in your career, I know probably one of the greatest highlights of mine is a gift you gave me unknowingly, which was the calling me out as I was watching my father and brother receive their Life West diplomas from you. And unknowingly, completely spontaneous, I was in the audience, just tears down my face. You said, would you please come up and give them their diplomas? And so for that, I say thank you very much.
I remember it well. And I remember the three of you on the stage. It was quite a sight. And congratulations to you and to they.
Thank you so much for this conversation. We are happy to facilitate future conversations around Contain and Eliminate. It has been a pleasure. It has been our honor to speak with you. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, we hope you'll join us for the next Real Story.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Take care.
Hey, if you like that video, be sure to subscribe to The Smart Chiropractor. We are posting videos on how you can market your chiropractic practice in a way that teach and invites consistently. We have found that is the magic formula to big time growth. So if you like this video, be sure to comment down below, smash that subscribe button, or visit us at thesmartchiropractor.com.